Uncle Wallace tapped his crystal wine glass. The room went dead silent. I had just spent 3 weeks surviving on black coffee to keep his company servers from collapsing. He cleared his throat and announced he was handing full control of my artificial intelligence project to his son, Otis. The same guy who recently bombed 3 entry-level interviews. A thick stack of paper slammed onto the mahogany table right in front of me. A non-compete agreement. Wallace stared me down, reminding the entire room how he pulled my parents out of bankruptcy 20 years ago. My mother's trembling hand grabbed my sleeve. She leaned in, begging me in a frantic whisper to just apologize and keep the peace. I set my silver fork down. I locked eyes with him and took a slow, deep breath. I kept my hands perfectly steady in my lap. Under the heavy linen tablecloth, my thumb found the screen of my phone. The device unlocked in the dark. 3 taps. That was all it took to enter the cloud infrastructure portal. I navigated to the master control list and located the global administrator accounts for Otis and Wallace. Swipe left. Revoke access. Confirm. The system processed the lockout instantly. I pushed my chair back, letting the wooden legs scrape harshly against the dining room floor. The screech cut through the tense silence. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my dress, and told them all to enjoy the rest of their evening. Then I turned my back and walked out the front door. The cool night air hit my face, and the agonizing weight in my chest finally lifted. My name is Calantha. I am 38 years old, and for the last decade, I have been the lead systems engineer keeping this family's corporate empire breathing. But to them, I was never a professional. I was just the debt collector's daughter. Growing up, whenever Otis threw a tantrum and wanted my science fair project or my college recommendation slot, my mother would physically pry the opportunities from my hands and give them to him. She would pull me aside, her hands shaking, her eyes darting nervously toward Wallace's office. "Just let him have it," she would whisper. "Remember what your uncle did for us. We owe him our lives." For 20 years, my parents lived like terrified ghosts in their own skin, constantly bowing their heads because Wallace bought their bankrupt business for pennies and called it a heroic rescue mission. False gratitude is the absolute cruelest chain a person can lock around your neck. It disguises a lifelong hostage situation as a generous favor. They shattered my parents' self-worth with that single concept. Gratitude. Now, Wallace thought he could use that exact same guilt to force me to hand over a multi-million-dollar artificial intelligence system to a boy who could not even troubleshoot his own email password. But Wallace made one catastrophic miscalculation tonight. He forgot who actually built the digital cage he was trying to lock me inside. And he completely forgot who held the master keys. The morning after the dinner, I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone lit up. It was a text from Otis. He didn't ask how I was. He did not apologize for the night before. He just sent a string of question marks, followed by a demand to fix the internal developer portal immediately because he had a board meeting in an hour. I did not reply. I watched the 3 dots of his typing bubble appear and disappear, frantic and desperate. Then came the call from Wallace. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I could almost hear his teeth grinding through the speaker as he threatened to make my severance package as empty as my chair if I refused to restore his access. He was trying to starve me out. He thought that by withholding my final payout, I would be crawling back within 48 hours, begging for my old job just to pay rent. But Wallace was playing a game from 20 years ago. He did not know I had spent the last month quietly preparing for this exact moment. I had already liquidated my retirement fund and taken out a private loan against my car. I had enough cash to last 6 months. And more importantly, I had enough to hand a $50,000 retainer to a lawyer who specialized in dismantling corporate narcissists. While Wallace was busy threatening my bank account, I was sitting in my home office, finishing a deep audit of the legacy servers he had forced me to migrate to the cloud last month. He wanted it done fast to save money, but in his rush, he forgot one thing. The old email archives from 2004 were still there, buried in a corrupted file I was not supposed to find. I clicked the file. It took 3 minutes to rebuild the index. When it opened, the air in my lungs turned to ice. It was not just a bankruptcy. There were dozens of emails between Wallace and a senior loan officer at the bank. Wallace had not saved my parents' company. He had actively sabotaged their credit line, whispering in the bank's ear that my father was a liability, ensuring the foreclosure happened. Then, he stepped in as the savior, buying the assets for 30 cents on the dollar. The hero who demanded 20 years of our lives as payment was actually the arsonist who had set the fire. The board of directors was forcing Wallace to retire because the company's growth had stalled. He was not just being malicious. He was desperate. He needed Otis to claim my artificial intelligence system so the board would see Otis as a visionary and vote him in as the next chief executive officer. It was a cold, calculated bloodline play, and I was holding the evidence that proved the entire foundation of his empire was built on a crime. By Tuesday, Wallace realized he was completely locked out of the cloud servers. He could not scream or bully his way past military-grade encryption. So, he got desperate and went physical. He grabbed my old company laptop from my abandoned desk, brought in a shady outside tech contractor, and forced his way past the local login screen. Sitting right there on the desktop was a glaringly unprotected folder. I had named it Fennel Artificial Intelligence Core Version 1. He took the bait instantly. Believing I was just a careless amateur, Wallace drafted an anonymous burner email. He attached the folder and sent it straight to the venture capital firm scheduled to fund my new independent startup with $2,500,000. The message was a direct threat claiming I stole proprietary source code and telling them to drop me or face a massive intellectual property lawsuit. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A specialized security alert flashed across the screen. I picked up the device, read the notification, and let out a slow laugh. Wallace is a man who spent 2 decades believing everyone around him was inferior. He thrives on the delusion that he is the smartest person in any room. That kind of arrogance is a fatal flaw because it makes you blind. He genuinely thought a woman who built enterprise security architectures for a living would casually forget her life's work on an unsecured corporate hard drive. He never stopped to consider that the folder was a honeypot. It was a digital bear trap. The absolute second his hired tech clicked open that file, hidden watermarks and metadata trackers woke up. They silently beamed a full diagnostic report directly to my private server. I had his exact internet protocol address. I had the media access control address of the machine. I had the timestamp tying the breach directly to the master desktop in his corner office. He thought he was launching a stealth missile to ruin my reputation and bankrupt my future. Instead, he had just committed corporate espionage, and he had signed his own name on the confession. Wallace leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together like a king holding court. He wore a patronizing smirk, completely confident that his anonymous email had already destroyed my startup funding. He thought this deposition was just a formality, a victory lap. Otis sat next to him, casually scrolling on his phone, completely bored by the whole process. Across the table, my parents sat rigid. Their shoulders were hunched, making them look small and fragile. My mother kept wringing her hands, her eyes darting toward me, silently pleading with me to surrender. She still thought we were the villains. My attorney did not waste breath on pleasantries. He slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the polished wood. He tapped his pen on the document and recited a specific state labor statute. He informed Wallace that by maliciously withholding my final severance payout past the legal deadline, the company had automatically voided my non-compete agreement. Wallace's smirk faltered. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to argue. He never got the chance. The heavy thud of a massive binder hitting the table made everyone jump. My lawyer flipped it open. He pushed a thick stack of printed emails from 2004 directly in front of Wallace, neatly fanning them out so the signatures were completely visible. He formally announced the immediate filing of a shareholder derivative suit for gross fiduciary breach, corporate sabotage, and fraud. The reaction was instantaneous. The color drained from Wallace's face so fast he looked physically ill. His eyes darted wildly across the printed pages, desperately searching for a loophole that did not exist. His breathing grew shallow and ragged. He reached out to grab one of the documents, but his fingers were trembling so violently he fumbled it. The untouchable patriarch was disintegrating right in front of me. The mask of the benevolent savior was ripped off, exposing a desperate, cornered thief. My father reached over. He pulled the documents away from Wallace's trembling hands. He lowered his reading glasses and stared at the pages. He read the words. Then he read them again. I watched 20 years of brainwashing shatter in real time. The decades of forced apologies. The holidays spent serving Wallace like royalty. The crushing weight of a fake debt that had dictated every single decision our family ever made. It all crystallized into pure, visceral rage. The veins in my father's neck bulged against his collar. His hands clamped into fists. My father stood up. His chair crashed backward onto the carpet. He grabbed the heavy glass water pitcher from the center of the table and hurled it violently past Wallace's head. The pitcher smashed into the wall, showering the entire room in water and shattered glass. Otis jumped out of his seat, screaming. Wallace shrank down into his leather chair, raising his arms to shield his face, completely terrified. My father grabbed my mother's hand. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective pride I had not seen since I was a little girl. Then, he looked down at Wallace, who was shivering under the broken glass. We are done. He spat the words out like poison. He turned his back on the man who had ruined his life, and the puppets finally cut their strings. The gavel came down with a heavy final thud. Wallace was officially indicted on 3 counts of federal wire fraud and 2 counts of corporate espionage. The federal judge sentenced him to 4 years in a federal correctional institution, accompanied by a mandatory restitution order of $2,500,000 to the corporate shareholders he had systematically defrauded. The social fallout was absolute. The prestigious country club revoked his membership within 48 hours. The board of directors scrubbed his name from the company history, and all those relatives who used to kiss his ring at Sunday dinners suddenly developed selective amnesia whenever his name came up. Otis, stripped of his unearned title and massive salary, found himself completely blacklisted from the tech industry. He currently struggles to pass the basic phone screening for entry-level helpdesk roles. 6 months after the trial, a thin white envelope arrived at my new office. The return address belonged to the federal prison. The handwriting was unmistakably Wallace's. He filled the first page with nostalgic memories of my childhood, leaning heavily on his failing health and preaching about how family must always forgive one another. He tried to pull the exact same strings of guilt he had used to control my parents for 2 decades. My pulse remained completely steady. I folded the letter in half, walked over to the paper shredder, and fed the pages into the humming machine. I tossed the empty envelope into the recycling bin and went back to my desk. The silence in my office was beautiful. Today, my life looks entirely different. My new startup operates out of a second-floor suite with massive glass windows letting the afternoon sunlight pour in. My parents visit me every Friday for lunch. My father brings fresh pastries, and my mother actually laughs now. A bright, genuine sound I had never heard during my entire childhood. I am surrounded by a brilliant, dedicated team of developers who respect my leadership because I earned it, not because of my last name. This is my chosen family. The constant, suffocating chaos of my past has been replaced by an unshakable, quiet peace. If you are watching this, and you recognize that heavy, sinking feeling in your chest when a certain relative calls your phone, you need to understand the psychology of a familial narcissist. They do not love you. They love the absolute power of watching you bow to them. There are 3 rules you must internalize to survive them. Rule number 1. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty does. Genetics are just a biological accident. Mutual respect is a mandatory requirement for a seat at your table. Rule number 2. Your silence against their manipulation is not patience. It is complicity. Yielding your boundaries just to keep the peace, exactly like my parents did, is nothing but an open invitation for toxic people to exploit you further. They will never respect a boundary you refuse to enforce. Rule number 3. Recognize the trap of gratitude. Never hand over the control of your life to someone who constantly reminds you of what they gave you. A gift that comes attached to a chain of control is not an act of kindness. It is subtle, devastating extortion. That night at the anniversary dinner, I thought I was blowing up my entire family. In reality, I was taking a sledgehammer to an invisible cage and rescuing the people trapped inside. Look closely at your own life. What invisible chains of gratitude are currently suffocating you? Who is holding a past favor over your head to keep you small and compliant? You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Share your story in the comments below. Take your power back. Cut those toxic ties. And finally start breathing your own air. Wow, what a ride. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there thinking, why on earth did her parents stay loyal for 20 years? Why did Calantha endure a decade of building an empire for an uncle who treated her like absolute garbage? It is incredibly easy to judge from the outside. But let me introduce you to something psychologists call the slot machine effect, or intermittent reinforcement. Toxic manipulators like Wallace do not just torture you 100% of the time. If they did, you would walk away immediately. Instead, they drop tiny, unpredictable crumbs of hope. A rare compliment here, a fake favor there, a constant reminder that they saved you when you were down. You keep pulling the lever, hoping for the jackpot of genuine family love and validation, but you only ever get pennies. Calantha and her parents were not weak or stupid. They were neurologically addicted to a rigged game. But when Calantha finally snapped out of the fog, she executed an absolute masterclass in financial self-defense. Let's break down her street-smart playbook, because this is exactly how you handle a corporate or family narcissist. First, notice how she handled the initial attack. Building the case. When Wallace tried to steal her artificial intelligence project, she did not scream or throw a tantrum. Emotion is the exact fuel a narcissist wants. Instead, she quietly revoked his access and set a digital honeypot. She anticipated his next move and let his own blinding arrogance trap him in a federal wire fraud charge. Document everything, secure your assets, and let them dig their own grave. Second, she used the audit strategy. Scammers and manipulators absolutely hate details. Wallace relied entirely on the vague, emotional myth that he was the family savior. But Calantha did not argue with his myth. She dug into the legacy servers and audited those 2004 emails. She followed the cold, hard paper trail. Never take a manipulator's word for what happened in the past. Look at the receipts. The truth is always in the math. Finally, she executed the buyout. Wallace thought he could starve her into submission by maliciously withholding her severance pay. He tried to cut off her oxygen, but Calantha had already liquidated her retirement funds and taken a loan to hire a shark of a corporate lawyer. She understood a critical life lesson. Sometimes you have to spend your own money to finance your own liberation. She did not wait to be rescued. She invested heavily in her ultimate freedom. Here is the verdict. Toxic manipulators bank on your fear, your isolation, and your misplaced gratitude. But the exact moment you stop playing by their twisted emotional rules and start playing by cold, hard facts, their entire empire crumbles. Your peace of mind, your talent, and your future are worth so much more than a fake debt to a fraudulent savior. If you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member, a manipulative boss, or someone who used guilt to keep you trapped, I want to hear your survival story in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the psychology of survival. And remember, never let anyone guilt trip you out of your own greatness.